The two variables that are being compared on this graph is children per woman, or total fertility, and child mortality. The trend displays a positive correlation between the two variables. As one decreases, the other follows suit. In the beginning, the pattern is that the red and yellow countries have the lower birth rate, but all countries are at a similar level with the amount of child mortality. As the years pass by, the countries begin to span out, and by the end, there is a pretty clear pattern between the different continents. Most of Africa is left on the outskirts, with high birth rate and mortality rate. India and the Middle East are somewhat in the middle, while the Americas, Europe, and Asia are in the lower spectrum of the trend. The main factors affecting fertility rate in women include the level of healthcare and education, religion, the status of women, employment opportunities, cost of children, government pressure, and age structure. Two countries that behave interestingly throughout this relationship are Singapore and France. France starts out on the outskirts of the big bubble of countries with a lower fertility and birth rate. However, Singapore starts right in the middle of the country cloud. Most countries have a high fertility and death rate in those times because there was not a lot of education about birth control in the countries, and there was not access to proper health care. As France develops and the cost for having children increases, the fertility rate slowly decreases, as does the child mortality rate. Suddenly, the fertility rate in France dropped significantly around 1915 to 1916 because of World War I and many men going off to war, leaving their wives alone. Then, in 1920, the fertility rate returns to normal and continues to decrease as France develops and celebrates the end of the war. France continues to stay in relatively the same area until the fertility rate suddenly increases in 1944. This happened after France was liberated from the Nazi rule during World War II and were subject to a new type of government, the Parliament. In the Parliament system, lineage is very important, so the fertility rate in France increased. Even though France keeps a high fertility rate until around 1965 when it starts to decrease again, the mortality rate decreases because of increased access to functional health care. As France continues to develop over the years, the education and healthcare quality gets better, so the fertility rate and the child mortality rate continues to decrease. Unlike France, Singapore begins in the middle of the cloud of countries with a high mortality and fertility rate in the 1800s. Then, Singapore's fertility rate begins to increase until it has reached almost 8 children per woman in 1938. This was because of the British colonial period in Singapore, when the population grew significantly and prospered. Singapore became a part of the Straits Settlements from the British East India Company, and under their new power, they continued to grow in wealth and size. In response to Japanese aggression in 1923, the British built a large naval base in Singapore, leading to Japan to take control of Malaya and Singapore in 1941. Sadly, this aggression lowered the birth rate significantly and mortality rates suddenly spiked. After the war ended, Singapore was left in ruins with a high death rate. However, once they demanded self-rule from the British colonial power, they have a significant drop in mortality rates in 1946, and they go on to making their country great again. The fertility remains high for a while as Singapore regains its footing and continues to develop and grow in population size. Once the population has grown to what the economy can handle, in 1957 the fertility rate begins to steadily decrease until the mortality and fertility rate end up at about the same position as France in 2012.